Welcome to Big Blend Radio, where we celebrate variety and how it adds spice to quality of life. Welcome, everyone, to a Big Blend Radio. Today, we're going to be talking with award-winning author and journalist Simon Parkin about his new book, which is pretty awesome. It is called The Forbidden Garden, The Botanists of Besieged Leningrad and Their Impossible Choice. It is out now, and you can also go to Simon's website, simonparkin.com. And I'm excited about this because you're going to end up on a bunch of our different podcast channels because this book is connected in so many different things. We're talking nature, we're talking about seeds, food, and we're also talking about a time in history that maybe some of us have forgotten about, right? Well,
Yeah.
welcome.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on. Yeah.
So,
Y-
yeah, let's start with the botanists and what they were doing because this was what
Mm.
in the mid 40s, or did they start before the 40s creating these amazing seeds?
Yeah, they started a little bit before. And so the seed bank was founded in 1921 in the middle of Leningrad, which is the Russian city that's now known as St. Petersburg. And yeah, that was founded by this world famous explorer called Nikolai Vavilov. And he was actually very well known outside of Russia. He would travel a lot to the United States and to England and other parts of
Mm.
the world with his botanists, with this mission to collect seeds from every wild area he could find and take them back to the city of Leningrad. And there he would sort them and store them and started to build up this catalogue of seeds. It was the first seed bank, really, as we would now describe it in the world. And
Wow.
yeah, Vavilov really spent the 1920s and 1930s traveling to 5 continents. And by the mid 30s, he had around 250,000 seeds and plants all gathered in the middle of the city. And his plan with them
Wow.
was, really to try to breed super crops. So he believed that in some of these wild varieties of wheat or maize, there might be properties that farmers had overlooked centuries before. Perhaps there was a wild variety of wheat that was very resistant to the cold or to pests. And so by capturing the seeds and doing experiments on them, he had this aim to try to breed, crops with a higher yield to essentially end and bring an end to famine.
That's amazing. So, yeah, so he's looking at what's going on, what's making these plants in this area maybe more strong. Like if they're in the desert, how come they're still growing? Like there's melons
Right.
out, we call coyote melons out in the desert Southwest. But I mean, I was going to say dingoes eat them, but coyotes do. I don't know why I went to the dingo land there. But, coyotes will eat them and they almost taste like quinine. And it's
Right.
very similar to like some of the desert squash you'll see in Africa. And they do taste like quinine. And I always wonder, like, if there was a connection between that melon and what we really have as quinine now.
Right.
So
Right.
that's an interesting thing. I'm going to bring Margot Carrera, co-host of the Nature Connection, on, even though this is going to be on the Nature Connection, probably our garden gossip show way back when. But we were talking about how, this famous botanist went around. You get to say his name, Simon. You know his name really well, but
It's
and
Nikolai Vavilov was his name.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
started collecting all these seeds and how nature,
Mhm.
some areas a seed, like a plant, can be stronger than others. So I think that melon might end up, that I was telling you about in the desert Southwest and in Africa. I think we got quinine from it. I have no idea, but don't eat it. It tastes bad.
Quinine water, yeah.
Yeah. So did he do like studies? Like, did he hang out in these different plant zones? And was he specifically looking for food when he was collecting the seeds?
Yeah, so he was looking for wild varieties of all kinds of different plants and flowers. So he got naked grain barley in Turkestan and India, and wild perennial flax in Iran, orange on the road to Kabul, and even went to Tokyo and picked up edible lilies and things like that. So yeah, it was really by the mid 1930s, he has this catalogue of rare plants and seeds from all around the world in the center of the city of Leningrad. And That's during this time, because he was doing so much collaboration with
Mhm.
Western countries and scientists working in the States and in England, he attracted a bit of negative attention from Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet
Oh,
Union at the time, who was suspicious of all of these links with foreign countries, and who also didn't like the fact that Vavilov came from quite a well-to-do family. And yeah, in 1940, Vavilov is out collecting seeds on a mountainside when a black car rolls up and four suspicious-looking characters get out and say, "Oh, Mr. Vavilov, you're needed in Moscow. Come with us." And it was of course a trick, and they were members of the NKVD, which was the precursor to the KGB, which everyone's
Wow.
heard of course, from the Cold War. And yeah, they took him to Moscow, and he was arrested and tried and accused of spying for the British government, and then sent to prison. So at the start of the Second World War, in terms of when Germany invades Russia, the botanists working at the seed bank in Leningrad, they don't have their leader anymore. So they're at a bit of a loss of what to do. They've got this incredible collection of seeds, but the German army is advancing on their city very quickly. And they're sort of thinking, should we be evacuating these seeds and hiding them somewhere? What are we going to do if the German soldiers turn up? And that's the situation in the summer of 1941.
Wow. And when you think about hiding seeds, they have to be, stored in a cool, dark place. You can't just start planting them, right?
Yeah, and in fact, they have potatoes that have been collected from South America, and they're planted out in the fields. And just as the German army is in the suburbs approaching the city, one of the potato specialists goes and quickly is digging them up while there's artillery fire happening around him. And actually, one of the shells lands so close to him that he gets knocked unconscious. And when he eventually comes to, he puts the potatoes in his sack and then walks back to the center of the city. So yeah, it's quite fraught and dangerous, and some of these plants and seeds are very fragile as well.
Mm. Yes. So at the same time, the siege is going on, and that lasted a very long time. And that was not I mean, a lot of people died in this.
Yeah, so the siege happens when the German army surrounds the city in late August, early September 1941, and their plan is really to starve the city into submission. It's much easier just to sit and wait for all the food to run out and then go and take over a city than it is to go and try and fight people. And so, yeah, they begin this siege. It goes on to be the longest siege in recorded history, more than 870 days. So it lasts all the way from
Wow.
1941 to 1944. And the most difficult time is really the first winter. So we can imagine, that if we were in that situation in the middle of a city and no food's getting in, perhaps the food in our larders and refrigerators would last for a few weeks, but at some point it's going to run out. And this happens to the 3 million people living in the city, and things quickly become desperate, and people are trying to barter their belongings just for a bit of a small ration of bread. The rations that they're getting from the authorities are not enough to sustain human life. It will keep you going for a bit, but you're essentially starving, even though you're eating a little bit every day. And so, this is the situation that the botanists are faced with. They have this incredible store of food, and a lot of it is small seeds, but some of it is almonds and nuts and other things that could be eaten.
Ooh.
And they're faced with this terrible decision. Do we distribute all of the seeds and plants that we have here in our collection to the starving city, to prolong the life of the people around us and ourselves? Or do we protect them, stop the rats from getting hold of them, stop intruders from getting hold of them, so that when the siege ends, we've got a chance to replant the fields and feed many more people and continue our scientific work? And that's really the terrible decision that they're faced with during the first winter.
Wow. That's a hard one. Margot, what would you do?
oh
She'd be
my
like,
gosh.
one for you and one for over there. Can't they just split it up? Save one part of the collection, you
As
know?
long as there's one left
Mhm.
or a
Well,
Yeah.
few
that
left. Yeah.
yeah, that's the exact debate they have. So they have a duplicate collection of many of the seeds, just in case the primary collection fails. And so some of the botanists are saying, look, why don't we just eat the backup collection and we'll still have the other one? But the leaders of the botanists say, no, if we don't know if the seeds in the primary collection are still good, if they've still got life in them, perhaps they would fail when we plant them. We can't, the reason we have the insurance collection is just in case something goes wrong. So we need to protect all of them. And these debates go on, and eventually they decide, no, we are going to not eat the seeds. We're going to protect them with our lives. And that's in fact what happens during the first winter of 1941. Around 19 of the staff starve to death rather than eat the seeds around them, some of them while still at their desks working on the collection.
Wow. Wow. How did they do in keeping the seeds the way they needed to stored? And because you do have to take care of them. You can't just put them in a bag and throw them on the side.
Yeah. Well, the seeds were placed in little aluminium tins already. That's how they stored them at the seed bank. But they have this big problem because once the food runs out in the city, many families, then face the awful choice: do we eat our pets? And a terrible, unthinkable thing, but that's what they have to do, and sometimes trade their
Don't say
pets.
that in this country
Yeah.
right now. That's political.
Dangerous.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Well, I mean,
Be kicked off the air, right?
I know.
well, I mean, well,
Yeah.
this does actually happen in this historical case.
Yeah.
It is something that they have to do
Understandable.
for their survival, and as a result of that, there's an explosion in the population of rats in the city because they've got
Wow.
no dogs or cats are hunting them. So these the rats get the sense that there are all these seeds in this building in the middle of the city, and they start, it's almost like I suppose an Old Testament flood of these rats all turning up on the in the building. And so the botanists they move the entire collection into two small rooms, and they pack them very closely together. They put them under sheets of tin that they take off the roof of the building, and then they lock the doors to stop anything from being able to get in there. Not only rats, but also they have a few break-ins from locals who heard about the food in there. So that's one of the ways that they work to protect them. And like you say,
Oh, wow.
for the potatoes, where there's a risk that frost will kill them, they keep them in the cellar, and the botanists who are in charge of the potatoes bring in a little stove into the cellar, and they try to keep a temperature above freezing so that those potato samples don't expire. So yeah, there's a lot of work going into keeping everything alive as well as themselves.
Wow. And don't let the rats get the seeds or the
Exactly. Yeah.
potatoes. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I mean, it is kind of like a crazy story. I mean, Margot, have you heard it? Did you ever hear about the story at all until you saw the book?
No, well, not the specific story,
Mm,
but I have heard about the seed collection and how important it was.
mm,
Yeah, yeah.
wow.
And
Wow.
they're starting to do that now because of global warming and losing a lot of plants to that.
Mm,
So it's
Yeah. There's
become
a
an
very big
important thing.
there's
Mhm.
a huge seed bank in Svalbard, in Norway, and some of the seeds that were protected by the botanists in the city, Leningrad, are now in that collection as well. And the seed bank in Russia is still there in St. Petersburg, and that's really how I was able to write this book, by contacting
wow.
an archivist there who very kindly sent me documents from the time and allowed me to tell some of the story from the primary sources.
Wow, wow. But just to hear that there was this kind of at that time frame and this, man going around the world, getting these plants. I mean, even getting them home to a seed bank had to be taxing, because you have to keep them cool and dry and all of that, and then, get there. I mean, travel is not like we have now, you
Yeah.
know, it is really a different time frame. So he really had some vision, you know. And now, do you think this is kind of when we look at what's going on even right now in Ukraine, how much, look at their production of wheat and how this is a big deal and soy and things like that. And it's become part of the story of what's happening now with Russia, this whole war. So it kind of feels like the story and what you've written is kind of history repeating itself in a really different, odd way, wouldn't you say? Did
Yeah,
you
I
feel
mean,
that writing it? You know?
I mean, it definitely is. You know, Ukraine is known as the breadbasket of Europe for that reason, because it's, produces a huge amount of food. And the Nazis were fully aware of this. And that was part of the reason they wanted to invade Ukraine and take it over, was to help feed the
Mm.
German citizens by taking over the food there. And, the second part of my book tells a story of this one German botanist who works for the SS, and he forms a commando to literally drive through Ukraine with a plan to go all the way to Leningrad to steal the seeds and take them back to Austria. So, it was very much fought over the seeds and the lands, and the idea that hidden in this latent life, these seeds, there's the capacity to feed millions of people, and how that can be such a useful thing in war, that people are willing to go to war over it.
Mm. So where are the seeds? Like, what's happening now with them? Like, have they been planted places? Like, where are we today with them?
Mhm. Well, like I say, the seed bank is still there in what is now St. Petersburg. I think, they have some funding issues and things like that, but there's still botanists who diligently work there in the same rooms in which all
Wow.
of this story from the 1940s takes place. Um, there's yes, I mean, the reason I heard about this story was because I read a newspaper article which was about a dispute about this bit of suburban land on the outskirts of St. Petersburg, where a local company wanted to build apartments, and there was an outcry because the land had formerly been owned by the seed bank, and this was in fact where the potatoes were dug up by the botanist under artillery
Wow.
fire. And this, because they'd been working with their seeds there in the 1940s, there were all these amazing rare trees from all around the world that had been planted in this area and found in very
Wow.
few other places. So there was a big outcry about, you can't build houses here. Within this newspaper article, it just had a couple of lines about what had happened to the botanists during the Second World War, and that led me down the route to find out more about the story. So, yeah, it's very much the work that was happening then is still very relevant and present today in all of the news stories that are happening. Yeah.
Wow.
I have a question. What led you, your interest in that way, and to write this story and do the research? What was
Yeah.
behind it? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've written a couple of books that are from the 1940s, and I not telling stories of soldiers or military operations so much as just of ordinary people and the effect that war can have on them, and the acts of bravery that people can do when they're, not serving but are just citizens. And this really appealed to me because it's exactly that. It's a
Mm.
story of a group of scientists who show immense courage and bravery and actually lay down their lives for what they believe in against a backdrop of, the evils of war.
Mm.
And so it's for me, a compelling story about a human drama, but also with a bigger resonance and point for today as well.
Yeah, especially when you think about how people argue about scientists now,
Mhm.
yeah, I like that part of it, of showing the bravery of scientists and what they go through, because they go through hell. They really
Mhm.
do. I mean, a modern day scientist and trying to educate people of how science is about change, literally.
Yeah. And
Mm.
after the war, a journalist from America actually visited, this is in the 1960s, and met with some of the survivors and said to them, how could you make the decision that you made, when there are people starving around you? Why wouldn't you feed them the seeds? And one of the botanists says, well, you're a writer. Imagine you'd spent years and years working on your book, and it was the only copy you had, and you're freezing to death in your study for whatever reason. Would you burn the books to keep you warm for a little bit longer, or would you choose to keep the book because that's your life work? And he said, well, perhaps now you can understand why we were not going to eat those seeds. That was our life's
Mm.
work. It was what we and our colleagues had given themselves to, and if we'd have eaten them, that would have been like destroying all of those efforts.
Mm. No, I agree. Well, even now, journalists, if you're a war journalist or a war correspondent, you're in the thick of it. And, do you photograph, the hungry kids, or do you like try to take them all in an airplane? You know what I mean? There's that hard thing that they go through today, I believe.
Mm,
It's a
yeah.
hard thing because it doesn't seem like women and children are spared in war these days. So,
Mm,
that's the other thing. I think what's so important about your the story is reminding people just what war is and how brutal it is. I mean, we see it on the news, but it becomes this we're used to it kind of thing. And I think stories like this, because it's storytelling, but it's true storytelling, has an impact beyond the headlines we always see on the news, you know?
yeah, and the scale of what happened during the siege of Leningrad is difficult for us to understand. But even by the most conservative estimates, 750,000 people died in the city during that siege, which is 4 times the number who died in the atomic bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima combined. So it's just a absolutely sort of unimaginable scale of loss of life happening. And yeah, we have to try to remember these things, and that what start out as skirmishes in war, or little power struggles for bits of territory, the effect that they have on human beings, on the natural world, is absolutely profound and lasts for a long time.
The natural world especially too. I mean, that's something that we always forget about, is that war destroys nature. I mean, you think about wildlife and, oh, let's just go bomb this. Well, what do you think the birds think about that? How far can they go? It's disruptive for so many different things. I wanted to ask you though, doing all your research. So you've got the war side and you're into the 40s, right? You know your stuff on that. But did you start buying seeds and growing plants? Or do you
Yes, I
garden?
did.
Did you?
Well, I'm not a farmer, and I grew up in the south of London. So my background is as a city person, although my grandfather was a farmer. So I did, when I went to visit his farm, I would see some of that world. But yeah, no, I did want to try and grow some seeds while I was writing the book, to try and feel a bit more connected to the story and what they'd gone through. And so, I built 3 little areas that I could get some seeds and dig them into, and planted some seed potatoes and some lettuces and other bits and pieces. And some of them did well, some of them failed, and because I didn't really know what I was doing. But yeah, going through that experience, and I've continued to keep growing things. Yeah, it really brought the story closer and closer to home, I think. And that's so often. I mean, not the listeners to this who are keen gardeners, I'm sure, but in general, I think in the modern world we can be quite separate from the way in which the food gets to us each week. And unless you're growing all your own produce at home, we're quite alienated really from all of those processes in a way that our ancestors weren't. So yeah, it was very useful, I think, for me to reconnect with that side of, or just that understanding of what goes into putting a meal on the table.
Hmm. And then when it goes wrong, like you were saying,
Yeah.
like if the seeds didn't make it, you're like, oh, okay. That's why, in school didn't we do beans? Did you do that, Margot? Grow like beans in school and things? We had that as a experiment thing in science or
Oh,
biology.
no. Yeah, no. I had to do it in my own backyard, and I'm still
No.
learning. I'm still learning like you are. Yeah.
Yeah, we all are,
So
because
make it.
yeah, doing it from seed is a little bit more it's a good thing because you can start, then you have the pure plant, right? Versus, yeah, it's a good thing and it's cleaner and everything, but that means you're gonna have to take care of that plant extra,
Mm-mm.
but it's
Yeah,
cool.
I think in the 60s, you mentioned the 60s, we were starting to see plants being produced and cross-produced, and even chemicals put in them. And so they were searching for heirloom, the original plants unaltered.
Mhm.
And so I think that's why this people in the 60s were looking into seeds. in the
Mhm.
seed bank. That's why
Mm.
I think that's when I first heard about it. I'm that old.
Mhm.
I was around in the 60s, but although I was yeah, very young.
Well, but that's really true about, I mean, even now there's a huge movement to get our, grow heirloom seeds, because it's the same thing even with our turkeys and chickens. Like Thanksgiving, everyone's getting the same kind of turkey. And then there's some farmers out there like Diesel Turkey in California, up the road from you by Yosemite. They have some heirloom turkeys because we're actually losing entire breeds of livestock, poultry over this mass production. And it's not like using what nature gave you, like what you're saying. I mean, they start creating, and I think part of the Dust Bowl, as I think part of what happened with the Dust Bowl comes from that kind of mass, like we're going to mass produce everything. I don't think people meant harm initially, but when there's companies like Monsanto that got involved, it's, hey, we're going to go from Agent Orange to, you know, sorry, I had to say it. I said the M word, but
Now
it
Baker.
didn't. Yeah, it yeah, now they got a new name, right? Yeah, that stuff was bad. And so, Nick, what's his name again? You got to say it, Nick
Vavilov, Nikolai
Vavilov.
Vavilov. Yeah.
Nikolai Vavilov. Yeah, I could at least remember Nikolai. Um, he really was that. When I talk about a visionary, I think he could see that potential, because we were at that
Yes.
point where civilization was starting to expand, right? And we had more people. Now we're kind of decreasing a
Yes.
little bit, but in the Western world. But I think he probably, and especially from traveling, he must traveling, you always start to see the reality of what's going on. And he
Mhm.
probably did, you
Yeah,
know.
absolutely. And the loss of habitat means that you risk losing obscure plants that could actually be very valuable for human food production. So
Mm-hmm.
he was extremely ahead of his time. And actually, there's a seed bank near to where I live on the south coast of England. And I went to visit it and look round the
Oh.
seed bank. And I was speaking to the scientist there, and he said, yeah, what Vavilov and the botanists were doing is exactly what we're doing at this seed bank, trying to find wild varieties and collect them before the habitats are lost, that, either due to deforestation or excessive building or war, whatever it might be. So there are many, many reasons why plants are being lost all the time. And there's this
Mm.
sort of real effort at the moment to try to save what can be saved before it's too late.
Wow. Well, they need to like have a Superdome or something, like to protect them,
Mm.
with guards. I feel like now, that story maybe inspires, even those working in seed banks to like really understand that's got to be like a treasured story,
Mm.
for them. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for writing it. That's cool. I'm not done
Mhm.
with it, but everyone, this is something to learn about, because it really goes with our future and today's world. Margot, did you have anything else to add?
Well, my it touched home for me because my father grew up in that area, and his mother and three children were starving in that during that time.
In the
So they
siege.
went through, yeah,
Oh,
during
wow.
they were living on the border of Poland and Russia.
Right.
Yeah, and also they were being annihilated too. And
Mm.
so it not only affects your story, not only affects um, the people who went through it, but as you said, it affects generation after generation. And I'm seeing the effects of that, and I'm seeing some of that come around again. And
Mm.
so yeah, it was touching to read, and just a strong honoring of those who survived and those who did the acts of honor in, for humanity over their
Mhm.
own,
Yeah.
their own lives. So yeah, it hits home with me. So thank you for writing it. And I could see, what he went through, and God bless him. Somebody was watching over his family, and they actually left their village, um, just as the I think it was the Russians were coming in, and they came in one side of the village and they were eliminating people in their homes, and they got word of it and they got out, and somebody helped them get out of the country, and here I am. And then
Wow.
my children and my grandchildren. So, and we live
Wow.
such a better life, and we have food on our tables, and he ended up doing very well in life. People helped him go to school and study, and he became a manufacturer and had his own business. And so
Wow.
all that happened in that year that you like to study.
Wow.
Yeah, that is
Wow.
amazing. So thank you again for writing
Mhm.
and being on the show.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks, Joe. Thank you
Mhm.
for having me.
Absolutely. Everyone, again, you can go to simonparkin.com and keep up with him there. But also the book title is The Forbidden Garden, The Botanists of Besieged Leningrad and Their Impossible Choice. And that is an impossible choice. That's a difficult one. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Lovely to meet you both.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio. Keep up with our shows at bigblendradio.com.